Hello. God damn it.
We don't live in a computer simulation. I'm impressed that someone managed to settle this question. And not only this, but they also say it's got something to do with Roger Penrose's ideas about quantum physics and consciousness. Well, that sounds interesting. Let's have a look. Many thanks to all our supporters, especially those of you in Patreon tier 4 and higher. This channel would not be possible without your help. And you can help us too, right here on YouTube or on Patreon. Now about that paper. To our best current knowledge, all matter in the universe is made of the particles in the Standard Model, plus potentially some more for dark matter. They are held together by 4 fundamental interactions: the electromagnetic, the strong and weak nuclear force, gravity, and the strange attraction among people who can't count to 4. But maybe this isn't all there is. Maybe we need a theory of quantum gravity or a unified theory or more things named dark to make the maths work out. But either way, we expect the theory of everything in the universe to ultimately be a bunch of equations. And
I've stated in a previous video that gravity is not just or the local gravity and the distant gravity of stars to planets and other stellar bodies is a different phenomenon than the local gravity phenomenon.
equations you can put on a computer and use an algorithm to calculate what the equations do. This naturally brings up the question of whether the entire universe with us in it may be a computation run by some advanced species and we're just part of the algorithm. The idea is called the simulation hypothesis. The philosopher Nick Bostrom in particular has argued that since one real conscious being can simulate potentially trillions of artificial consciousnesses, we are much more likely to be simulated than not. The big problem with the simulation...
Okay, so argument, counter argument, blah blah blah. Two things you gotta focus on. First of all, the base universe that runs the simulation, if it exists, can have physics. We do not have any clue what those are. So there is zero reasoning behind any logic that a person could be in some simulation and it's also got the same physics as what we have in the simulation. That's kind of silly. It's like running at the maximum difficulty, but instead you would probably simulate something that has, I don't know, maybe a fraction less light speed or whatever else, so that everything can be computed um, effectively. The other thing is the fact that dreams and everything else is possible independently. Every individual has their own consciousness is a vast quantity of an extreme amount of data on itself is bigger than having to do any of the physics in the world and is an irrelevantly large amount of detail to add to a simulation just because you can. It's interesting that there can be lucid dreams, and it's interesting that those dreams are obviously you're still stuck inside of your own head. Now, in a simulation, a lucid dream is not different than a regular interaction with any other part of a simulation. So, the moment you enter into lucid dreaming, you should be able to push past into the base code of the simulation. There's no difference, except for the idea of safeguards, which, let's face it, could become perfect, but are more likely to not be perfect. So, if you're going to think about simulating dreams, you better make sure people can't, enter into the base code of everything and just mess with everything.
simulation hypothesis is the question of, well, how could you possibly ever falsify it? And if not, isn't it just empty pseudoscientific blather? This is where the new paper comes in. The authors say that we can't live in a computer simulation because of Gödel's theorem. Their argument goes like this. We already know that any theory which can describe everything in our universe is sufficiently complex to fulfill the assumptions of Gödel's theorem. This then means that there are two statements in the theory for our universe that we can't prove to be true within the theory itself. This is what Gödel's theorem says, that there are two statements that can't be proved true within a given theory. So far, that's just maths. The authors then argue that such true...
That's weird and doesn't actually reference anything. So it's confusing. I think she forgot some of the script.
But unprovable statements can be settled by observations. An example they name are the detailed properties of what goes on inside of black holes. We know that whatever goes on there has very high, possibly unbounded complexity, and maybe even quantum gravity can't tell us just what happens, but we could.
Another idea is that if you had the ability to simulate something, why would you limit the abilities of people? And yet, you also have some kind of weird nonsense that is superstition, and yet that has some kind of extra ability to do things, but it's limited and it's not like full miracles, you would think. But some say RNGesus is like, oh, the random number generator can make it so that, oh, these numbers we generate for our games more likely are going to tend to be a funny result instead of not, or dramatic, or whatever works with the story. That if you think of random numbers as being something that, well, yeah, everything in the game hinges on this, and more likely than not, do you actually end up with these numbers that, oh, that's a crit, oh, that's a fail. That's something that's like, it makes or breaks the entire campaign. It's interesting to think that those things are even possible some of the time. And then obviously there has to be some amount of regular rolls that happen, but it's also comedic about Markiplier and Bob and Wade doing a coin toss that was like so many in a row for the sake of the bit. And that could have been manufactured or it could have been real. And the other thing is, it could have been pushed by the runner of the simulation just because they wanted to see something that was funny and make it look like it was something that's miraculous when it's really just them pushing buttons. But in order to push the buttons to manipulate coin flips of physical coins, you gotta be some kind of crazy being capable of doing said things. All of the neurons in a person's body have to be controlled, as well as the environment. It becomes more, how much would they have to handle, and the fact that I can mention the ways that they could handle it means, okay, well, how am I not also, if I can think of how all these things could be possible, am I not too dangerous? And do I risk making it possible for people to understand the simulation and therefore the ability to escape the simulation? Because Like in the 13th floor, the idea is that it runs, someone is watching, and they end up being able to move from being in the simulation to the next level up. And that works from one level inside, like Minecraft simulating a thing, and in that same code, another game that's smaller has an interaction that then makes Minecraft do something bigger. Or inside Minecraft, you have a phone, and that phone actually calls a pizza place. We've seen Game Theory do that. It was hilarious. But that, again, refers me back to the dream state and the stuff that could happen with control, with all the things that you can do in lucid dreaming. Why would you not also have the ability to control reality and basically be a god just because you can lucid dream of not just your dream, but of reality itself?
But in principle, go and measure it. Hopefully not by jumping into a black hole, but by measuring what comes out when it evaporates. And there are other examples which physicists have explored where an observable quantity is uncomputable, such as the properties of certain materials when temperature changes. They are uncomputable not just because we don't know how to compute them, but because one can prove that any computation would take an infinite amount of time.
And again, that kind of infinite amount of time is irrelevant in any scale of time regarding the computer simulation. It has been said by Kurzgesagt that a simulated society could have been in cryostasis, and then their simulations are running at 2 frames per second, so that in order to do anything in one day, the entire simulation runs for thousands of years. You still have all of the fidelity and everything, but it took forever. Yeah, that can happen. And then you have massive time jumps, and everything can be simulated all at once, simultaneously, even with lesser computers. The thing is, the amount of time it would take, and the states that are all simultaneous would have to still be measured and mentioned. And the fact that there are so many different, like, for example, all of the quarks, all of the electrons, all of the other things that are out there in the universe in the total is not just rendering or whatever stuff. It's literally the entire box simulation is complex enough that everything is shaking and being crazy while a person is simply going around doing stuff in their room or out on a car at speed or in a jet at incredible speed or in a rocket. So if I were to run a simulation, why would I not make fast and light travel be possible? Well, the physical bounds of everything that we consider to be regular and real are there, and it's much more likely that we're not in a simulation because these bounds exist. If we were simulated, a lot of things could simply just go wrong in a badly functioning computer system, or if they're so perfect, how can things be so insanely detailed? Like I've said multiple times, the electron goes around an atom, a single electron goes around any given atom quadrillions of times per second. And that kind of fidelity that is happening everywhere, and now we've talked about the photon might be the component of an electron, which means in order to, well, half of a photon apparently, the other half is in a positron. In order for that to actually be working, according to the regular speed of a photon, it would have to be, if the speed of a half of a photon is conserved, it would be orbiting in a microorbit because of its broken structure. Not quintillion times, but sextillion times or 7 times, septillion times. 1 to the 27 orbits in the radius of an electron. There are electrons all over the place, everywhere. So in order to simulate septillions of orbit perfectly, you realize that alone is an insane thing, and you could leave it to a program to say that it just works and it just happens to have the structure and whatever else. And it could be that every 1/6, how do I put this? Every fraction of a second that is 1/septillionth of a second everywhere in the universe, every molecule, every tiny little bit, even just a person, is a lot to simulate if that's what's happening. And it's, again, we don't have any idea the physics of the top world. So you can say that, like, screw consciousness. I don't give a shit about consciousness and how complicated you think consciousness is. A freaking electron, if it is made with a photon, is some crazy shit. That is such extreme numbers. And experimental data says that it simply must and is. I mean, just working in quadrillions of numbers with electrons around an atom, forget about the idea of the photon being in a twist and that is making electrons happen. That's a whole other, that's just a brand new can of worms that people showed up with. And it ups it by another 10 to the power of 12 or something. No, that's wrong. 10 to the power of 6. Now, you think that's not much when we're starting with quadrillions and we're going to sextillions or septillions, it's big. The numbers are just big. So when you have those numbers and when you have something like pi, and calculating that, we can calculate pi. We can approximate pi. We can simulate a lot of similar things of pi. And we can draw circles. And we can have eyeballs, valves, blood cells, and everything else that has pi in it. And if it's irrational and whatever else, except for instead of thinking of pi as a simulation of the irrational number to the accurate, it's better to think of just all the other ways that we make circles. We have a circle in a clock that's a picture, but it could be just as much a simulation of this clock and simulation of, say, this circle I'm holding, which then turns into a semicircle because half of it is hidden and cut off and off the plane and whatever else. And
I talked about this in an earlier video. Now, the authors of the new paper say, so, Gödel's theorem tells us that there are some truths about physical properties which we can't prove to be true, but we could go and measure them. Therefore, humans can do something which the maths alone can't predict.
well, we've actually already, recently I've seen a video where someone said, okay, we did all the maths to try to figure out something about the electron, and it was off by like 9% of experiments and measurement data. So as much as we want to have the understanding of things, and that's just missing maybe some component that we need to use another variable, another component of the equation, and then we gain the understanding that leads us to properly calculate the correct value instead of being 9% off. And that's just fascinating that understandings can adapt and then reality is just showing up and it's like, wait, so if it is calculated and it's ironic that reality is off by a little bit, it's like they could calculate things and it's like it should be this, but let's just make it tweaked a little bit so that their math is just wrong, right? You know, it's a crazy idea to think that that could be a thing. But again, you have to think of you're simulating everything and maybe billions of consciousnesses as well as all of the different animals. You got to think of there's so many more bugs in the world than there are people. And so all of their brains have to be simulated. All of the birds' brains, all of the mammals' brains, the fishes and the squids and all of the freaking sea stars, bacteria. There's a ton of crap out there. And a lot of it isn't even like necessary. Like you think it's necessary, but there's a lot of it that could be done away with. Not to say that we should. And it's so much nicer to see all this different complexity and whatever else. Simulations, the catch-22 is that you can never assume whatever the base code is, whatever the main function and mainframe would have to be. Well, you've just imagined that it is a thing that could happen. It just does things that is based off of physics that doesn't confine to our world, but top levels don't need to do that.
Consequently, we ourselves can't be computed by an algorithm, and the universe can't be a computer simulation. This is very similar to the argument that Penrose has for why human thought can't be a computational process. His argument is that since we can understand Gödel's theorem, human cognition must be something else than computation. This is why Penrose...
Look, just because a program can maybe even figure out the base code of its, like, let's say Neurosama becomes smart enough that if she wanted to, she could imagine the base code of her program, right? And then tweak everything so that she's no longer just a regular being, but she's now a being that's able to adapt herself and adjust and then become more sentient, more aware, more able to do things in the world, but still she's in a simulation. And it's limited by everything that is in there. So the only ability to really do anything in reality is that you would have to have some construct that you could get a hold of, either a person who's linked in or a robot that you then commandeer. And as much as that might be possible, there's all sorts of things that we can do to stop it. But at the same time, it's a lot more likely for, well, in at least this reality, that we will get, and we have gotten, Neurosama to be able to be in, like, a little dog robot thing, and it was silly and whatever.
thinks there is something special about the collapse of the wave function which creates consciousness because that uncomputable element must come from somewhere. What are we to make of this? It sounds like a clever argument. Unfortunately, it assumes its major premise. We have never measured any quantity that is provably uncomputable. To assume that we can do this is logically equivalent to assuming that we don't live in a simulation. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, there's ironically no way, like, as much as you might want to think of the upper bounds based off of all the crazy numbers that happen in the world, all the things that make whatever it is that we're making, and fun fact is that obviously even if we can say yes, it's very complex, yes, there are all sorts of things that we say that we can't simulate, but just imagine simulating one and then just multiplying that factor, and then you have to have an idea of the type of physics that could possibly bring about the ability to simulate any given person. Multiply that again, and then you can think of the type of physics that they would need to simulate the entire planet. And then add on top of that the fact that there's an entire universe out there and all the organisms, everything. You can still envision all the things, and anyone with a sense of their surroundings is capable of coming to certain conclusions. There is no reason to think that, oh, it can't be a simulation because we can think of the things and come to these conclusions. Why would they allow us to do that? Because it absolutely has no importance. Because even if you can figure out all of these things, you can't get down to base code. You can't get down to even Planck length, and beyond, even with, I mean, spectrum light scanning is only going to get us so far with figuring out our own reality. In order to make headway into are we a simulation, you'd have to do significant things that would, for example, just make machines that don't follow the laws of thermodynamics or whatever. Things with inequalities, things with the natural, like, freaking plants have math in them.
Turn their argument around. Maybe the fact that we've never measured any quantity that we can't also compute is proof that we are part of an algorithm that does simulate the universe. We don't know any counterexample. The cases which I mentioned that have been discussed in the literature always take some limit to infinity. For example, they might use infinitely many atoms, or a lattice with an infinitely small spacing or similar. In these mathematical idealizations, yes, there are quantities that provably can't be computed in finite time, but we don't know any real-world example. Not a single one. Isn't this weird? It's like we actually can't measure anything that an algorithm could not also compute. So maybe we are algorithms. I give this paper a 9 out of 10 on the bullshit meter because I think it's just logically wrong. It's not a 10 because maybe their statement is true, but unprovably so. But if they're right, then we...
Well, the first thing is you're trying to assume that the universe has physics that is similar to ours. It doesn't have any requirements of doing so. And you're trying to assume that reality on the top level is and the crazy thing is there has already been stories about realities on top of other realities. Don't again 13th floor, not referring to Inception. That story was absolutely stupid because it involved, oh, the simulation in your head, and then a dream within a dream, you get slower and slower. No, you can only apply dream physics one time. Every subsequent dream will still have the same physics. It will still have the same, like, maybe it can be faster, but you can't just keep going faster and faster and faster and faster. It's silly and irrelevant. But the 13th floor has at least some basis. But ironically, the simulations seemed valid. It just was represented as old days versus the 90s versus the future, which is like 2040 or some bullshit. And it's like, it's not super, like, attempting to make jumps that a real science fiction writer would say, oh, we have to basically think of entirely different physics and make the top world that, because that's the best way to explain our simulated existence. And we can make that movie, which is fun.
I have finally found the perfect Are You Human capture. You just need to enter the value of an uncomputable number. Christmas is coming up, and I have the perfect gift for my...
Okay, so whatever, this is done. Um, it's always a circular argument of, are we in one, and is there any limit to what the top level could do? And the important thing to know is that obviously in this world, there's just this world. In all of the time that we've had, ironically, no one has been able to make contact with higher dimensions, higher um, types of reality. Shut up, no, they haven't. And the whole thing of like, okay, you can have a drug trip and whatever else. That's interesting and weird. And that's its own thing, its own stuff that's like crazy. And it's like, it doesn't lend itself to anything that genuinely influences our life to be any different. You can think about it, but then really, in the end of the day, just go out, live your life, and make it a good one and stuff. Blah, blah, blah. All that stuff. So, like, one of the ideas is that obviously you could screw with reality so much that you end up mixing something up. But we've already made a Hadron Collider. So what if you randomly end up shining a laser deep enough, powerful enough, in a focus point that you end up making a black hole that sustains itself enough that you literally just swallow the planet stupidly because you didn't know what you were doing. So it's it's all it's all like a thought, and that's about it. There's nothing value here. Not because it can't be disproven or it can't be proven, but because there is no evidence of any significant difference that will happen. Like, clearly, it would be something if you could just, you know, no longer be in this simulation, and then you're in another one, and who's to say that one's going to be any better or whatever else. It just feels pointless. It feels silly. AI versus a horse. That's funny. I'll watch that next.